I'm the founder of DeSciWorld. No, I'm just playing. Josh, go ahead.
DeFi being a financial layer is kind of the first and necessary step of making whatever the future of the internet and assets and ownership is, right? Towards the end of the bull run of 2021, I saw people spending, $5-6 million on an NFT of an ape. And I thought, wow, we could so easily use this for funding and facilitating interesting research.
Open science, open source science, that is the real foundation of or the precursor to what we're calling DeSci currently. One of the main problems that I see with existing systems is that it prohibits scientists from being able to ask the questions and pursue the answers that they are truly passionate about. And I think that does detriment to innovation. That does detriment to human quality of not just life, but just quality of mind, quality of peace, quality of spirit. The problem with these things is that you have old boy clubs, you have legacy systems. Like you can go to a university and most of the professors are in their 80s.
The free is practically built on the shoulders of rebels. Yeah, people who said we will build our own circus because the world isn't perfect. We will create new money. We will create new systems. We will create new states.
On the decentralized science side, like you don't burn down the Library of Babylon to then, rewrite the whole thing. You just want to reserve the books. You want to keep everything, right? Like we don't need to burn everything in order to come back together. On the science and academic side,
the anarchist mindset of Web3 and especially DeFi just doesn't resonate with what would be required to make DeSci's dreams come true. The DeSci is not here to replace traditional science or TradSci. It's a complementary system. And so it will fill in the gaps for the different parties.
It will be good to see better opportunities for people to spend more money on things outside of that system. And then people will say, hey, actually, my $500,000 that I put into this thing actually produced this outcome. And the bottlenose dolphins of this area now have tripled in population size in just 10 years or something wonderful like that.
You are watching Renegade Science Podcast, and I'm your host, Marie-Unique Vieux. In this podcast, I meet scientists and entrepreneurs that are developing groundbreaking technologies that will change the world. Their tech is so new that it has not yet become mainstream. Do you want to know what our future looks like? Then I invite you to the world of Renegade Science. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Today, we talk about open science and DeSci with founders of DeSciWorld, Joshua Bate and Jelani Clarke, who is also a Chief Business Development Officer at Aminochain. DeSciWorld is a platform that covers everything that happens in the world of decentralized science, DAOs, research, and communities. Now, a few words about Aminochain. If you are not a scientist, you probably have never heard about it. But in the world, there are hundreds of biobanks that hold samples needed for scientific research. This is a huge market, estimated at $77 billion in 2023, and expected to attain around $170 billion by 2033. Aminochain builds a system that connects biobanks worldwide using blockchain technology. Imagine an Amazon, but for biobanks and with Web3. Why? This we will find out together. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hey.
Thank you for being here today. So I'm super stoked to have you at Renegade Science Podcast. And to kick off the conversation, could you please introduce yourself for our audience? Because I know that you have both several projects. Yeah, and for us to navigate and understand all the background that you have, please give us an intro.
Sure, I'll kick it off. So I'm the founder of DeSciWorld. No, I'm just playing. Josh, go ahead.
You got me, man.
Go ahead, Josh.
Okay, so I'll start. Hi, I'm Joshua. I'm the founder of DeSciWorld. Collectively, me and Jelani are part of the founding team of DeSciWorld. I'm sort of full-time on DeSciWorld. I've been working in the space in crypto, Web3, DeFi for a number of years. Started DeSciWorld back in 2021. Jelani joined just after it started and has been there ever since. We both have our hands in various other projects, which is true to the sort of Web3 decentralization DAO participation ethos. But DeSciWorld is who I am at the moment, forever, it seems. But Jelani can talk a bit more about himself.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Jelani Clarke. I'm a neuroimmunologist by training. So legacy science, TradSci is where I come from. Saw a lot of the issues experienced and saw a lot of the issues both from the academic and the more corporate side of science. And that's what kind of fueled my interest and jumping into what was to become the decentralized science space. I very quickly met Josh and decided to come on board and help build out DeSciWorld, of which is basically my root in the DeSci space. But to your point, we've also, collaborated and consulted and worked with a variety of different projects. And most recently, I guess since the beginning of the year, I've been working as a chief business development officer at a different project known as Aminochain. And that one is a little bit less Web3 native, but still applies aspects of Web3, tech from Web3, and the ethos of Web3 to hopefully help improve the scientific landscape. So from that end, we have DeSciWorld, which I think is a real avant-garde application of what we're hoping science can be in terms of our goal there being to shepherd that forward. And then Aminochain is more so a Web 2.5 platform that will handhold legacy systems, hopefully, and bring it into this future that DeSciWorld is pioneering. So I take, I view this as a synergistic approach of like grassroots applications of novel technologies in Web3, coupled with enterprise leading applications that people can understand more easily where they are currently.
Thank you. And you touched a very important point. So probably everyone who works or worked in Web3 space would say that we are still not achieved the point of mass adoption. And the problem is that the space is still very young and too small. And the only apps that actually got significant traction are in DeFi. And we already talked about that just before the podcast, but I think it was such a nice conversation that I want it to be recorded so people can listen to that. So DeFi creates value in a very straightforward way. You put money in, you get more money out.
Hopefully.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Yeah. If you are lucky. Okay. Yeah. It's not an investment advice.
Yeah.
So, but many other blockchain projects, they're still struggling with creating value beyond this DeFi application. How can it be solved from your perspective?
I mean, I'll let Josh talk about that as well, but I'll just give my 2 cents. So I guess for reference sake, and Josh mentioned this. So Josh comes from DeFi. I don't come from DeFi. So I have a slightly different perspective as a scientist. And I think to the point that we were mentioning before we started the podcast was I view DeFi not as an end, but a means to an end. I think there is a good mental state in terms of building out this infrastructure for its purposes, internal, whether it be financial application or not, well, within the realm of financial applications. So making sure that people have access to different funding tools and avenues and ways to, in some cases, unshackle themselves from existing systems, which may not align with, how they live or may not work or may be corrupt, depending on your perspective. But I think for me, ultimately, the value of DeFi will be determined by the ends that it facilitates, beyond just number go up or beyond just personal wealth and sovereignty. I think that's when we'll start to be able to have real narratives beyond memes, which are fine, but in terms of yielding real world impact and how we can leverage these novel systems to actually expedite the process to get there, right? We hear a lot about accelerated X, so accelerated longevity, accelerated innovation, accelerated all these things. And I think DeFi has a real strong potential to be one of those vectors that help that acceleration to happen. But I think we're still not there yet as a community. We're still not there yet. I think there's a lot of untapped potential, and a lot of it is, I mean, it's new, it's relatively young, right? So there's still bugs that have to be, and maturity within the technology, but we're slowly going to get there. And that's when I think you'll see a lot more collective mind shift toward this is actually a really important tool. Once we have those proof of concepts out there that DeFi is more than just what it currently is, but starts to open up what it could be. And in science, this is where we come from DeSci, which is decentralized science, for I guess we didn't really define that, but decentralized science for those of you who are new. And I think that DeFi can be, and people are experimenting on its application on how to make science better. And better is subjective. But I think there are a few tangible ways that we think that we can apply DeFi to actually make it holistically better for all, net good for all. But I'll let Josh give his 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that DeFi being a financial layer is kind of the first and necessary step of making whatever the future of the internet and assets and ownership is, right? If we want to do what Jelani is mentioning, which is improve science and make better opportunities, more accelerated versions of the existing institutions, better outcomes for scientists, better research itself, then all of these things can be facilitated in some way by DeSci. Some of the tools that can be built can improve those methods. But none of that system would have worked if we didn't have, unfortunately, financial infrastructure on the bottom end. Because we live in a world where financial infrastructure rules everything that we do. Transactions, value exchange, maintaining accounts and leverage and debt and everything that all of these financial instruments underpins the entire system, including technology, including science, including politics, including just being, a citizen of the world. And so everything needs finance, unfortunately. And so we need DeFi to be successful and well-tested and robust and scalable for all of these additional tools that we're building in Web3 to actually function. Right now, I would suggest that the DeFi space has the tools that can scale. They just haven't scaled because there hasn't been a huge amount of external flow in. It's happening more and more so. It's going to happen probably this next year. It's going to probably explode. And we'll have more retail participation, not just the everyday person participating. Once those DeFi rails have been battle tested, then we can start to innovate on the consumer layer, on the DeSci layer, on the novel use case of blockchain layer. And that's kind of where we're heading. DeSci has been around since 2020, arguably. Some tools exist now. Some novel protocols have been built over the last 3 years that are cool and do work really well and have really sort of led the way for what DeSci can be. But the amount of tools that are going to be built, it's going to be insane. It's going to be every single part of science is going to have some kind of on-chain version of itself. Reputation, publishing, funding, all these things are going to have multiple iterations all on-chain. And they're going to be powered by the transaction and the financial layer, which is DeFi and the blockchain itself. So creating value outside of money is going to be just like creating value in society outside of money. But right now, the only thing that interests people is the money because that's the only thing that's built out. So I think it's, we could talk about how to generate value in general, right? But that's the same question because the same infrastructure that exists right now that people have to generate value with can also be will be brought on chain once the DeFi systems are more robust.
So the question was more in building the fundamentals, to be able to later build something more elaborate on top of that.
Yes, correct.
And for me, it's interesting with Jelani, I understand he is a scientist who saw some problems and holes in the existing system, in the traditional scientific space. Joshua, how did you move from DeFi to DeSci? What inspired you?
I've had a fairly strong intuition that a lot of the systems of knowledge and information and science exchange that we have had a lot of control over the last sort of 150 years, but especially the last 50 years. Control in the sense of certain things are given more funding, certain things are suppressed and not allowed to be studied or spoken about. And this was just something that I felt very strongly for most of my young teenage into adult life. And because of that, I have always wanted to develop systems or be a part of systems that improve knowledge exchange and make science much more open, make research much more open, make the information asymmetry, which exists in our world and causes most of our problems, to be better, to be healed in some way. And I saw DeSci around the turn of 2020 to 2021. I saw it pop up. I met some people who were working on some early projects and it inspired me. And then towards the end of the bull run of 2021, I saw people spending, $5-6 million on an NFT of an ape. And I thought, wow, we could so easily use this for funding and facilitating interesting research. So built DeSciWorld off the back of that.
But
Yeah,
still,
Well, I just wanted to add here. So we often define DeSci as like this advent from Web3, but I would argue that, not argue, like DeSci comes from roots of past systems. So open science, open source science, that is the real foundation of what, or the precursor to what we're calling DeSci currently. And while Josh emphasizes this aspect of Web3, I just want to put a disclaimer, and this is obviously up to different people are subjective about this, but I think that DeSci itself exists beyond just the application of Web3. It is an amalgamation of a variety of different techs that kind of come together. And I do believe that Web3 is very important in terms of devising those incentive alignment structures, the liquidity aspect from financing that exists outside of the current paradigm. So science is very much captured by certain financial frameworks, and it's very difficult to get around those. DeFi really, or Web3 helps with that. Auditability and provenance is a huge aspect of science, credit where credit is due. And we've seen the breakdown of that system over the last, almost since the beginning of science, really. It was downhill from the beginning. But we've really reached a point where those need to be fixed. And I think Web3 does help in all those, and is probably critical and fundamental to all of that. But just, again, where credit is due, there has been decades of work in terms of building out systems that are more open and facilitate broader forms of science to exist. But they just haven't quite been able to get there. And I think Web3 is going to be one of those catalysts that do help us get to that actual goal that we've set out, or that was set out decades ago. So that was just the one disclaimer that I wanted to add.
And I mean, just to add on that, I think the pendulum swings in time, right? And we've been in a period of time where control has been quite heavy. Incentives have been misaligned. So people have been doing false science and getting paid for it. And then good science is being suppressed because of the payment systems and the incentives, whatever. There's been a problem. But science originated, I mean, science has been going for many thousands of years, but let's just pretend that the Enlightenment period was like the beginning of a truly open science, right? And the Enlightenment period was defined by the idea of anybody being able to participate, anybody being able to draft up results, and basically the creation of the scientific method as we know it today, which is if you can do it and you can prove it and someone else can reproduce it, then it becomes canon. And that's sort of like what the whole foundation of the Enlightenment was on. Maybe we had, with Galileo and stuff, you can see how the things were being controlled before that, but we went through this period of the Enlightenment, which was fully open science. And then we decided to come back on the pendulum towards control, and it's coming back towards open science. And as Jelani mentioned, the last few decades, that pendulum has been trying to break through. People have been trying to do much more open science to return it to what what it was, but we didn't have the tech that facilitated it to overcome these large control systems that society has. But now we do have the tech that allows us to overcome these larger control systems. And so science was open, was closed, was open, is closed, will be open once again.
And obviously Web3 will pave the way, with all the technologies and DeFi and new publishing and everything. But here I have a hard question, which is Web3 is practically built on the shoulders of rebels. Yeah, people who said we will build our own circus because the world is imperfect. Yeah, there are many people with malicious intentions, with lots of money, who are not letting good science to happen. Yeah, who hide their inventions, who use their money to maintain the monopolies. And now we will create new money, we will create new systems, we will create new states. As I love the Network State book by Balaji. I think it's brilliant, but like he speaks revolution. On the other side, we have these like institutions that were built for centuries and that hold enormous amount of power, money, yeah, and also like regulations and government and everything. So, and we see that in the very moment when even very huge Web3 project like Binance or whatever, yeah, comes into contradiction with this mastodon, yeah, with traditional systems, we see what happens. So we have all the legal cases, yeah, like people sent to prison, so on and so forth. So my question is, do you think that, how do you think this like revolution or evolution may happen? Because it looks like challenging the system directly does not work well.
So, firstly, I want to jump in on a few things. CZ being apprehended is very interesting, but not an example, in my opinion, of like true cypherpunkism or revolutionary thinking coming up against the system and being defeated. CZ, big respect to the guy. He's a big man, but he did not do things in a smart way. Oh, no, sorry. No, that's wrong. He was one of the smartest people, is one of the smartest people in crypto. He did some illegal things and he went to jail for like 100 days for it, right? Like one of the richest men in the world doing his thing, went to jail for 100 days. But he knew that was what's going to happen. Like that's the path he went on. I don't think there's any real value in a system like DeSci intentionally going up against the institutions with all their regulations, all their might and all of their history, and trying to burn them down to the ground in a bid to bring something new. It doesn't really make sense, and it's certainly not going to capture the attention of most of the academic community. Maybe on the financial side, there's more sense to it, but on the decentralized science side, like you don't burn down the Library of Babylon to then, rewrite the whole thing. You just want to reserve the books. You want to keep everything, right? Like, and just give them some more people so more people can read them, right? We don't need to burn everything in order to come back together. On the science and academic side, on the finance side, that's another argument. How do we do that? Working directly with people in the institutions, because institutions are a faceless, unconscious thing, but people inside them are faced and conscious, and they have choice and they have a spirit, and they might want to actually contribute to something that works better for the world. And even if they don't, hopefully we develop systems that pay them more money, and then they will use those new systems because it's better for their wallets to participate in DeSci, because you have more ownership of your things, you get more money for your research, and then you just slowly leave the institution, and the institution has to adapt or it dies.
Yeah, there's very little I would add to Joshua's point. I think the anarchist mindset of Web3 and especially DeFi just doesn't resonate with what would be required to make DeSci's dreams come true, and the spectrum of dreams that those are, right? So you'll notice the more time you spend in this particular space, in the DeSci space, is there's a lot of hand-holding with regulators or conversations, meeting the table, mediating with existing legacy systems, because to your point, the goal is not to burn it down, it's to create something that is complementary. So we often talk about in our presentations and when we educate people on DeSci, at least I do, Joshua does as well, other people not so much. this idea of DeSci is not here to replace traditional science or TradSci. It's a complementary system. And so it will fill in the gaps for the different parties, the faced and cognizant, conscious individuals in TradSci that feel like they've either been pigeonholed or don't have the same opportunities as others. DeSci will be that outlet for them to explore new frontiers in terms of achieving a similar goal. And so my vision of what happens into the future is that you pick and choose. You can pick from TradSci, from the more corporate, from the more ivory tower perspective, and use whatever is of a boon there for you if it works. And then when it stops working, you can go to the crowdsource, you can go to the decentralized science, you can go to the open access points of science brought on by that space, and choose the boons that exist there. It is the ability to choose. And I think that's ultimately what we're trying to build, right? It's more options, more opportunities. And fundamentally, that's what DeFi is too for the financial realm, with a variety of different narratives. But I think DeSci is much more aligned in terms of a consistent narrative of just building systems that solve actual problems, whatever they may be, and then allowing people to just pick and choose with whatever suits their purposes.
Yeah, I will say on this point, like, I am one of the more I'm not anarchist at all. I think anarchy is not a very good ideology, but I would personally like to see a lot of things changed quite quickly and quite severely, right? So I do fall more on that side of the equation for sure, which is why I'm so excited about DeSci, because of all the things that Jelani mentioned that are a really strong property of DeSci, which is this much more collaborative, interactive with the current institutional system. That in itself is the perfect Trojan horse for what you could consider to be truly revolutionary change from Web3, right? Because finance is so entrenched, and it is the entire power structure of the entire system under which we live. So if you're going to replace that, you're probably going to have to burn it down or try very, very hard to convince some people to switch. But DeSci is just better science, and it's actually just a more suitable system for science, so it does better work. And at the meantime, you're actually getting people to use decentralized technologies, to understand the ethos of ownership of your own data, of your own assets, to download a wallet, to own some Ethereum, or whatever it is you're doing. You're slowly actually getting people to be involved more in Web3. And it's a great Trojan horse for that eventual movement, which is to replace Web2 with Web3, and however that looks.
I perfectly agree with both of you. I'm asking this question because I'm interested how to overcome this, or how to find a solution for this issue. And I also wonder, scientific research is a slow process. Like it really takes years, sometimes decades. Yeah, if you are, I don't know, developing a new drug, or you are researching something that never existed, and sometimes it just fails, and usually it takes a lot of resources to do that continuously. That's why this first stage of fundamental research is usually financed like by governments, or with grants or whatever. So my question is there enough resources in DeSci to really support science like in a meaningful way right now? Or we still need to grow?
So I'll take a stab at this. So it depends on what lens you're looking at. If you're looking at it from a financial perspective, like DeFi does not have the total net capital, like the market cap of traditional markets. So DeSci, which is even smaller, doesn't have the liquid capital.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Significantly smaller.
Yeah, like significantly smaller. We don't have financial capital there, but I would argue that most of the problems in science, though we like to play on this narrative, are not actually financial issues. You do have a subsegment that does have that, but a lot of it extends beyond that. And so if you're going to look at non-financial applications of DeSci, then yes, absolutely. There are existing technologies today beyond Web3 that could solve a lot of the problems that science has, and it's just there's a lack of awareness, or they're components that are not yet to be laced together. So from the tool sets that currently exist, whether it be different forms of publishing frameworks, which are still being developed, to interoperability frameworks that allow for computation that is still privacy preserving, to a variety of different other tech stacks like AI and decentralized AI, all of these things can contribute to improving the gaps that exist in traditional science and kind of expedite the shift towards what we're calling decentralized science, or more holistic science. So I actually think that, ironically, though the capital piece is something that is important, it's actually the least likely to drive impact in the current iteration and into the foreseeable future, because you just don't have that massive amount of liquid capital you can just inject and throw at science. And even if you could, the problem is what you'll see in DeFi is that it perpetuates the same issue, right? So CZ is a good example, right? And your concept of, there are benevolent and there are malicious players in all spaces, including Web3, right? And just throwing money at it doesn't solve that. As a matter of fact, it probably tends to exacerbate, because it shifts people's focus point. So if you were just throw a ton of money at the legacy science system, that doesn't mean you would fix it, because you need new channels, you need new doors, you need new ways to link things to give rise to novel technologies. Joshua has a great presentation on YouTube that talks about science building off of the brain power of previous scientists, right? Like science, we really only see the culmination of an idea. That's often what gets most touted. You don't really see all of the efforts, the decades and centuries of efforts that have led to that culmination. And so what Web3 can do is provide that trail of provenance of the people who have contributed to that idea and be able to showcase that. And I think that's fundamental in making a more robust record of scientific activity, the general scientific record.
Yeah, I mean, you won't get better answers to that question than this. Honestly, it's great stuff. But really, the point about financial capital being the least impactful part of DeSci is so true. It's funding science is cool, but like the amount of money that is required to fund a lot of research these days is just obscene. And the amount of money that is available from traditional players to fund that research is obscene. And that's not going to change anytime soon, right? In fact, that's going to get worse. The accumulation of capital, especially around pharmaceuticals, is going to continue to concentrate. And maybe barring a financial revolution, that's going to continue. So what else can we do to improve the scientific ledger? And ownership is basically the most important part, ownership of the entire process. And this is what Jelani was mentioning. And I think the most important thing is AI and blockchain. AI is a very, very powerful tool. It's terrifying, but also wonderful. And it's going to do some crazy things in our lifetimes. But it's very, very much born with blockchain as a twin, as a sister or a brother or whatever you want to call it, because AI produces so much information and passes off so much information that keeping track of the information that it's using is very difficult. But if you have a blockchain where the information, the data itself is a tracker, then it's a match made in heaven. And so AI and blockchain are going to be doing lots of things together. And if you have a decentralized blockchain where anybody can participate and people can create value off of it and take ownership of these things, then it's a no-brainer. There's no way that AI is going to be any less, like AI is going to be so involved in science, the entire process, that blockchain is an inevitability. Hopefully we can just have decentralized blockchains that are part of that process. I think that anyone that says otherwise is trying to take your bags and should be stopped.
I say otherwise. I'm actually going to jump in here. I say somewhat otherwise. So the other thing before I jump to that, the thing I want to say before I jump to that is that, just to wrap up the conversation around the financing and the capital, there is two ways to solve a financing issue. There is increase the amount of liquidity or decrease the necessity of the amount of liquidity, right? And so that's kind of, to wrap up my original point, is what I meant. You can throw a lot of capital, but that'll just continue perpetuating what exists. But if you create frameworks that decrease the need for that much capital, then you won't have that same level of burden. And so that's what I see. And, whether it be with the AI piece in terms of streamlining distillation of information and just the distribution of information, requiring less brain power and minute aspects, or creating better channels for distribution of science, whether it be a variety of verticals. Aminochain is focused on biosample distribution and human biomedical data sharing and collaboration and interoperability. These things facilitate the optimization of science. And when you optimize, you have less leaky system, you require less capital, it's less risky, and you can have better frameworks to, kind of support innovation. So that's that. Now, to the aspect of for fully permissionless and open access blockchains, I think there's a place for that. But in line to the concept of science being much more regulated, there are certain applications where that will not do. You cannot apply that same way, or at least to the depth with which you're hoping to apply it. You can't I would never suggest somebody to put their genomics or their medical data, and we're very much focused on the biomedical space, but science is much more than that. But private things that must remain private for a variety of reasons, whether artificial or not, those things cannot exist on blockchains. And so there's a limit to what the application of fully permissionless blockchains can apply. Those can be subsidized with permissioned blockchains, of course, but even then, I'm not one to say anything is the be-all, end-all of everything. I think blockchain will fit where it needs to fit and where it can fit, and people will try to shoehorn it into places, and that's great, because then we'll actually see where it works and where it doesn't work. But the scientist in me is always take a measured approach to a certain extent and be openly, critical of what you believe as well as what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, I would suggest anything that you don't want on a permissionless blockchain, you probably don't want on a permissioned blockchain. That's what I would suggest.
So we touched the topic of Aminochain. So what you do, you connect various, how many biobanks exist? 500? How many in total?
Oh, no. You mean in the world?
Yeah. Thousands.
So there's about,
I don't know.
Yeah, thousands, like tens of thousands. There's tens of thousands of biobanks, and a biobank, for those who don't know, is a repository of information, biological information. It could be in the form of physical samples, so donated tissue, environmental samples and whatnot, and or data relevant or related to these assets. And when you expand the definition of a biobank to a biorepository, there are tens of thousands approaching the hundreds of thousands, right? And these are both traditional full integrated institutions like hospitals and academic biobanks, to small collections that exist in labs that people have just gathered over a period of time. And so what Aminochain does is create essentially a globally integrated operating system for the acquisition, the distribution, the detailing, the interoperability, the connectivity for people who are looking to leverage these different assets for whatever purpose they may be, whether it be for commercial application, development of therapies, research and innovation. All of these things exist in silos. And so we've built out the framework that links them together and making them easy to access.
Yeah, and for me, the advantage sounds really obvious and robust. And I've read that in, I think, 2020 or 2022, there was a pilot project that connected around 20 or 25 biobanks, and they were reporting how well now the research goes and how great that we tried to do that. That was somewhere in the US, I think. So, but you are doing that on a bigger scale, like a planetary scale.
Yeah, so I mean, there are networks that exist for biobanks, just like there are networks for everything, right? So the Cooperative Human Tissue Network in the United States is one example of that. It's a network of tissue acquisition and distribution channels. BBMRI, which is the equivalent in Europe, which is a pan-European coalition of different biobanks that have shared governance, shared participation, shared standards. You have the UK Biobank, which is one of the most robust biobanks and high-quality, top-tier biobanks in the world. You have a variety of them throughout, Australia as well. But what you'll notice in those key places that I've defined for you these are all like high-income first-world countries. which is not actually representative of the amount of people that exist in the world. And so whereas you have those networks that are essentially siloed within their nations and they do deal with one another, that leaves a swath of the globe empty without this ability to create, or not without this ability, but just have not created these interconnected systems. And so not only is Aminochain's goal to link these different existing networks, but it's to also allow for the establishment of similar innovation hubs from the realm of biomedics in low and middle income countries, emerging markets. So if you think South America, which is gigantic and has a plethora of individuals, they don't have the same level of interoperability and networking as these other Western countries. And so we're in South America building out these networks. We're in Asia and Southeast Asia, which is a huge booming ecosystem now that is coming online, building those systems. India is another great example. India is massive, has a lot of scientific innovation coming out of it, and is also pushing really hard to have really robust biomedical innovation. We're working with them as well. And so the goal here is to create that, again, intra-planetary operating system for biomedical data sharing, and then eventually interplanetary as we start to colonize other places, right? Because at that point, it becomes much harder to share data. And as we continue to expand, we need to have more robust pipelines for that to happen. And so Aminochain is one of a few different solutions, all tackling different things, and we're integrating with them as well, with different players in the space, to make this comprehensive, holistic view.
How did you come to this idea about biobanks?
So Aminochain as a platform is founded, again, not by myself, but I'm part of the founding team, by a gentleman named Casper Barnes. And he has a whole story. You can go to the Aminochain website, and our introduction page, it'll describe it. But biobanks are essentially fundamental to human-based research and innovation. And that is largely because for most places on the planet, it is illegal and highly unethical to test on humans. And so the only way to get real robust human data is through sampling. That being said, the biobanking space is very kind of held together by tape, for lack of a better word, much like most of the medical system is. And so we, having had experience as a scientist in that realm and speaking with like-minded people, the opportunity for novel technology to come in and optimize how things are done, facilitate how things are done. And we're not reinventing the wheel. Like we saw this with the financial industry, right? The optimization and digitization and automation of financial industry has just yielded a boom in terms of what can be done. And so it's just applying those same principles of making things internet ready, making those things, bringing them into the digital age, which we are not yet in a lot of the scientific realm, and just applying this novel tech to that. And we just happen to be early enough to see this new wave coming together and working with participants like Joshua and everybody else in this space who are kind of pioneering novel ideas and just seeing what fits. And then speaking to them, this is the other thing that's just really important, is bridging that gap to the existing players, the existing biobankers, to the existing institutions and saying, hey, you're sitting on samples that you can't distribute because people don't know how to find them. You're not able to demonstrate what you have because you haven't put enough thought into the collaborative interplanetary aspect of people who may want to access them. Well, let us meet you where you're at. Let's create these platforms. Let's create this Amazon experience where people can come and they can see your samples, obviously to the depth of which you want them. Everything is maintained self-custodial. It's a federated network. Allow you to display what you feel you need to display to attract attention, and then let those samples be acquired under whatever terms they need to be, consent frameworks inclusive, and let's drive innovation together. That's the whole point of a biobank, really. Any sample that is not utilized is a sample that is misused. You have to think about it. It was consented by a patient for it to be used for innovation, whether it be for themselves or for a community that they care for, or for their family or whatever. And so we are a good example of aligning those incentives beyond just the profit and innovation for the researchers or the pharma companies, but bringing the patients along and the wishes of the patients along in terms of how they want that to be used, and then leveraging a blockchain for the capacity to audit that. And so we change things from informed consent, where I inform the patient, or basically come to patients and say, we're going to take most of the rights or the access to your sample. Are you okay with that? To something that is more shepherd the patient along, and whatever the patient's terms and conditions are for that sample is maintained within the track record of how that sample is utilized. And so that's what, on a whole, Aminochain is looking to do. And Joshua's point of Trojan horsing, we start with a B2B company where we introduce these novel concepts. And then by virtue of the fact that they solve very specific problems and overt issues, we could then introduce these concepts of, well, patient engagement, allowing patients to track where their samples go, making sure that the informed consent is there, and essentially is demonstrated consent. And so I think you start with slowly hand-holding and introducing these concepts into legacy systems, and then that inadvertently, by virtue of the fact that it just makes things better, shifts them to these new, more robust, more avant-garde, more innovative examples of institutions, these novel 4.0. So we're talking about biobanking 4.0 now, and that's a great thing.
Yeah, that sounds big and definitely exciting. And I wonder why these biobanks, so we think about science as something forward thinking, like at the frontier of humanity, there are people who are performing this amazing research that pushes the boundaries of what is possible. But why it's so old-fashioned, so silent, so not connected, although this is so obvious that this knowledge exchange and it seems that it's obvious, but nobody did that. Where is the problem?
I think, so on one hand, science is very paradoxical in that it's the whole premise is to push the envelope and try new things, but that brings upon a certain level of measured approach, which can sometimes pigeonhole people. And then people are people. I think, science itself as a concept exists beyond just humans, and humans are one aspect of individuals that are kind of picking at it and intoning certain aspects, but people are afraid of new. People are afraid of instability, and science is the whole premise of instability. So you have a little bit of that cognitive dissonance that exists there, where, a scientist will spend a lot of time discover something new, and once they have it, they hold on really, really tight to it. And it's very difficult for us we become dogmatic. Science is very dogmatic. So there's that extent, but then there's also the fact that things take time to change. You have to verify, measured approaches are a lot longer than non-measured approaches. So I don't necessarily think it's a willful thing. It's not a malicious thing. There's just the character of science itself, and the people who do the science just kind of preclude the ability to necessarily move quickly. And what you need is, and you'll see this in any industry, you need just new people coming in. You need turnover. You need more people who are not afraid, and that usually happens to be the younger people because they haven't been boxed into certain thinkings. They're willing to push the envelope. And this is where you see the median age of Web3 is 25. DeSci is a little bit older.
We are already old.
Yeah, we're dinosaurs. Even not, Josh too at this point. We're all dinosaurs in this space, right?
Yeah, for sure at this point. It's crazy.
Right? But the problem with these things is that you have old boy clubs, you have legacy systems. You can go to a university and most of the professors are in their 80s. It doesn't science is not a hugely taxing. It's mentally taxing, not physically. So you can have a long time of people who stay, and they slow down the iteration that happens, the versioning of science. And so it's just a time thing. And I think you need to have, and this goes back to, you need to have really defined use cases that are not unquestionable, but really emphasize that this is a problem. This is an egregious problem. This is a viable solution to it. And then you just got to push. You just got to be hard-headed. And that's what happens. So that's what we're doing.
I will say, not to be too controversial, but if we want to see turnover in personnel, might longevity be something that slows that process down?
This is what I wanted to ask, actually, because all this Web3 and network state and DeSci is built largely on this idea of longevity. So who will get this longevity treatment first? Obviously, the people who want to sit in their comfortable leather chairs as long as possible. So
Yeah, so
Well,
let me just stop that right
let me take this one. I think that the longevity medicine will go to those who need it first, obviously. And those who need it first are those that are older and have more things to maintain. So the powerful, the rich, those people typically need it more and they will get it sooner. I think that the idea that there's an argument that we often hear, which is like, well, everybody has an iPhone now, which I think is a wonderful argument. Like, I have a nice phone, it's very smart. And it took about 40 years for the technology to go from ARPANET, which was owned by universities in the military industrial complex, to now I have it in my hand and I can do whatever I want with it. That was 40 years. Now, 40 years of longevity medicine with maybe a quicker distribution of 20 years of accumulation amongst the powerful and those without is going to cause like a completely two-tier society, like ultimately two-tier society. And even now, if you look at a phone, for example, it has all kinds of technology in it that benefits, like, for example, the military industrial complex, right? GPS tracking, data harvesting, all these things that are used for surveillance, which, yes, we can use them and they're great right now, but they're not for us, these phones. These phones are for the complexes that create them, right? They're consumer products. They have advertising built in. They have surveillance built in. So yes, we have access to technology, but it is access 40 years later on their terms. And longevity will be the same thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'll also add that I think it's a misrepresentation of the space to say that longevity is what is fueling it. I think longevity definitely has had the loudest voice because it's a common topic that, like, the rest of the world is also focused on, or is very, overt on things like Twitter, the mediums that we actually leverage to talk about marketing of DeSci. But if you look at the ecosystem maps that exist out there and just the myriad of projects, longevity is actually a really small piece, a very, very small piece of the space. I think the vast majority
yielding very few results as well. Like, it's
yielding very, very few results, and that's by virtue more so of the fact that longevity is not really a thing, right? Like, longevity is an outcome, but is built up of many different things that include, disease prevention, good health. Like, there's a bunch of like nutrition, all these kind of things. So longevity is kind of a catch-all term to a variety of things. So it's going to be slow. It's not going to necessarily be the quickest moving thing. And it's a sexy title, so people are kind of holding on to it. But the DeSci space is much, much wider and broader than biomedics, which is also something that captures a lot of the narrative. There are projects that are working on anthropology, on astrology, astronomy, a variety of different things, right? Ancient medicine, applications that go into tech, publishing, access, all these kind of things. So just make sure that if you're interested in the space, you do the due diligence in terms of going to places like DeSciWorld's website to learn about the variety of different projects that exist out there. So that being said, yeah, I think, longevity is sexy term. I think everybody, or a lot of people, want to live forever. But I hope I hope the space, or people just in general, don't get bogged down and really understand that it is a multivariate issue. And we actually need to fundamentally solve some of these underlying things to actually get there. Like, why are we talking about longevity when most of the world is dying or suffering from diseases that can be avoided?
It's right? Absolutely ridiculous, right? Like, why are we talking extending the lifespan by 5 years when the planet is sick and dying, right? Like, we can live for another 20 years, but the planet's going to be so much worse in those 20 years if we don't do anything about it. And I think that the amount of resources, both mental, social capital, mindshare, attention, and also actual capital that gets put into that endeavor is really imbalanced to the needs of the planet itself. And there is that classic argument. It's like, well, the biggest problem that we all face is death, because death comes for everybody, and once you're dead, you're dead. I think it's very easy to obfuscate these things by putting these sorts of thoughts out there, these sorts of words out there. It's like, during COVID, they're like, if you didn't do this, then you didn't care about your, do you want your grandma to die? Then wear a mask. These kinds of things, which are just like, I would suggest are I'm sure there's a philosophical, a debate term for it, like a straw man or something. I guess it's one of those, but it's a lot of rubbish, honestly. And there's a lot of money and time and potential that could be put into much more useful things. And DeSci as a vehicle should allow us to express that desire. Having said that, because longevity is very sexy and because it has a lot of support from our favorite people in the world, which is our tech overlords, then it gets a lot of attention. And actually DeSci is voting with its wallets, and longevity is the thing that actually gets most money and attention in a decentralized way. So whilst we are permissionlessly accessing these technologies, we are not necessarily doing so from unguided decisions. And so it would be good to see better opportunities for people to spend more money on things outside of that system. And then people will say, hey, actually, my $500,000 that I put into this thing actually produced this outcome. And the bottlenose dolphins of this area now have tripled in population size in just 10 years or something wonderful like that, rather than, the 500th mouse trial that ended with another 10 days of extra lifespan, but a lot more suffering. I hope it works. I hope that people get what they're looking for, but I would just like to see many other problems fixed in the first place. And I think DeSci can contribute to that.
I think here we need a showcase. I mean, I love this perspective of DeSci being much bigger and wider than this longevity narrative. Tell me about the most exciting project in DeSci that you think are like now.
And DeSciWorld. Right?
Obviously. Yes. These two, number one and number one.
Exactly. Number one and number one. Yes, no official order. No, I think, nobody would be able to give you that answer, because to the point and to the ethos of DeSci is that it is subjective to everybody. Some people are lean more towards these publishing solutions, and that is extremely important to them and is actually factually important. Other people lean more towards the tech, interoperability, AI, decentralized, all these kind of things. There is no one more important necessarily than the other. And really what the space is, to Joshua's last point, it is the opportunity for people to explore and align their research and science that they love in a way that allows them to pursue it in the way that they choose to. And I think ultimately, if you're going to drill down to why I personally love DeSci, and one of the main problems that I see with existing systems is that there is a lot of capture that prohibits scientists, and I consider everybody to be a scientist. It prohibits scientists from being able to ask the questions and pursue the answers that they are truly passionate about. And I think that does detriment to innovation. That does detriment to human quality of not just life, but just quality of mind, quality of peace, quality of spirit. The ability to seek out and align yourselves with what interests you, I think, is the fundamental purpose of science, or is the fundamental aspect that fuels science, and good science at that. And we need to go back to that. So if there's one thing that I hope and I know and I see DeSci doing, and I've just done it for myself, is give people the opportunity to do that, to follow the paths and follow the questions in a way that hopefully down the line, once the capital is there and the proof of concepts have been shown out, will also allow them to do so in a way that gives them a quality of life financially to then further pursue those things. I think, it's going to be a balancing act, but that's what I hope to see. So, the best projects in DeSci, everyone will have their own answer to that.
Yeah.
And that's good.
Very, very diplomatic. I would say, apart from, of course, DeSciWorld and Aminochain, that anything that makes science fun and participatory, again, is going to be what's going to be most exciting about DeSci. There's lots of wonderful tech, unbelievably smart people, incentive mechanisms, and money coming out of this space that will revolutionize science. But what I'm most excited for is much more participation in science from a very diverse sources, including young people, even like children, for example, consuming rather than providing, and that they have value than provision. But we were talking about being older, right? There was a period 15 to 20 years ago where the internet was fun. It's a great time. Everything was new. I wasn't there for MySpace, but some people had MySpace, and then YouTube just came out and all these great things were on there. All the websites you could play fun games on, even the educational websites that the BBC put out were fun, right? That went pretty south pretty quickly. And now the internet is a horrible place to be. And I'm hoping that Web3 can make the internet a much better place to be. And DeSci should provide infrastructure for very exciting, interactive applications to learn, to be excited about the world around us, to connect with good knowledge, and to just not have our heads filled with nonsense all the time, which is what the internet has descended into, unfortunately.
Yeah, science is a contact sport. Like whether it be physical and or intellectual, it is a contact sport. And so the more people at play, the more essential chaos and entropy that we can push into the system, the better outcomes, the more innovation, the more ideas, the more novel ideas will come out, and that will lead to better, hopefully, net positive innovation into the future.
Yeah, God bless the creative chaos. So I have one last question, because we are like on this philosophical note. First motto of Google was "Don't be evil."
Yeah. They got rid of that.
Exactly. And you said very often, like new technology that first is fun. Yeah, and it's a lot of joy and exploration and everything gets, well, I wouldn't say spoiled. Yeah, but it becomes a bit evil. So do you think that there is a way or is it just a universal human trait to spoil the fun in the end? Or there is actually a way how not to let technology become evil and stay like creative and positive?
I think history has shown us that there is always going to be a need for guardrails and boundaries to be set. And as time moves on, as these humans defer or like to delegate to other participants and other parties, there is a corporatization that happens. There is a an ivory tower aspect that happens. That's just by virtue of who we are as humans, as history has told us. So I think, every beginning will have that kind of free flowing aspect until something goes wrong, and something will always go wrong. And then the pendulum, as we go back to Josh's original example, it'll swing the other direction. It'll be like, oh no, we need a little bit more guardrails in place. And then that becomes a very slippery slope. And so I see it'll eventually happen. I think here the goal is to create, and this is where technology becomes valuable, is that it can offset human instinct in the way that if you create systems that cannot be as readily bounded. So going back to ownership, if I own my assets, there's only so much you can do to prohibit me from leveraging them. It's when we give up that control that we have this real robust control mechanisms in place. And so this is where I think Web3 becomes really important and is critical and fundamental, and there's no other way really. Yeah. Is in that sovereignty piece. If we can maintain aspects of sovereignty woven into these new paradigms, then yes, I think we can have a better shot at making them stay fun or open or all these kind of things. And that's the novel piece. Back in the day, you owned your lot and you'd shoot somebody or stop them from coming on your lot. When you bequeathed that ownership onto a system that is governed by the few, well, now you no longer have that same capacity. We need to make sure that the internet is allowed to be traversed and experienced, but not necessarily colonized in the same way that we see the real world is colonized. And it's that balance. And I think that's what will yield the kind of thing that you're talking about.
Yep. So all I'm hearing from Jelani is more guns on the internet, but no, I do agree with everything he said, because I believe, sadly, that absolute power corrupts absolutely. I think it's a neurological thing. I think it makes sense that if you get that much power, then you should be corrupted so that someone stops you, because if you have that much power, then you'll be like the ultimate ruler in the end if no one stops you, and that's a problem. So if absolute power corrupts absolutely, and has shown us across many thousands of years to be the case, then what do? Do we just keep going through chaotic cycles? I want DeSciWorld to be something very powerful. So I've thought a lot about this. Is like, if it does become powerful, then how do we remain accountable? Ultimately, you have to build the systems from the ground up with accountability and decentralization in mind. We now have the technology for the first time in known human history to mechanically and technologically decentralize the power so that you cannot physically do those things, which is what Jelani was mentioning. And not to get too philosophical, but there is this idea of like cycles, like great ages, and we've supposedly left one and entered into another. And depending on what you want to believe in the definition of the age that we're entering into, it's supposed to facilitate flatter hierarchies, more decentralized participation, and more democracy. Now, we have the technology that allows that to happen. I think we'll probably come up against on this pendulum swinging between great power struggles, which is what we've lived through for about 2,500 years. We'll probably come along a pendulum swinging from some other dichotomy or problem, which could be, I don't know, boredom and oversaturation or whatever it is. I don't actually think great power struggles will be the problem for the next 2,500 years. I'm not sure what they will be. I'm sure it will become clear, but I think everyone's going to be so sick and tired of great power struggles that actually we'll find new problems to have. And because the technology will allow us to facilitate that distribution of power.
Yeah, at least we can be very happy that we live and work in the beginning of a new great cycle. And and as many people before us, we want to fix the system and make it better.
Exactly. At the very least, it's an opportunity, right?
Yeah, and we should use it, definitely. Thank you so much. That was a lot of fun.
It was a great conversation.
And it was very inspirational.
It's been a while since we've been on a podcast together, actually. So this is nice. I'm going back to the roots. Yeah. Thank you, Maria. It was a great opportunity. I look forward to seeing how it comes out, and I hope the audience enjoys it.
Definitely. I'm absolutely sure that everybody will enjoy this conversation.